8 days. That's all it took. Just 8 days after promising to love him for the rest of her life, she stood in front of police officers with blood on her clothes, and a story that didn't quite make sense. She insisted it was self-defense. She claimed the man she had married only a week earlier had suddenly attacked her. But detectives noticed something unusual almost immediately. The crime scene told one story. Her words told another. And the evidence would soon reveal a chilling truth that no wedding guest could have imagined. How could a marriage that looked so perfect end in murder before the honeymoon was even over? Tonight, we follow the investigation from the wedding aisle to the courtroom, uncovering every lie, every clue, and every shocking discovery that led detectives to the truth. Friends described Emily Carter, 29, as calm, intelligent, and deeply private. She worked as an office administrator in a quiet town where almost everyone knew each other. Her fiancé, Daniel Carter, 34, owned a small construction company and was known for helping neighbors whenever they needed a hand. To everyone around them, they seemed like the perfect couple. Their wedding photos showed smiles, laughter, and promises of a future together. No one in those photographs could have imagined that one of them would be dead before the wedding flowers had even begun to wilt. Only 8 days after exchanging vows, a frantic emergency call reached dispatch. A woman cried through tears. "My husband has been stabbed. He attacked me. I didn't mean for this to happen." Police raced to the address expecting to stop a violent domestic dispute. Instead, they found silence and a body lying motionless on the kitchen floor. At first, detectives believed they were responding to a tragic case of self-defense. But one tiny detail inside the house immediately made an experienced investigator stop and question everything. The first patrol officers secured the home while paramedics rushed inside. Daniel Carter was lying on the kitchen floor. Despite every effort to save him, he was pronounced dead at the scene. Emily sat outside on the front steps, wrapped in a blanket. She was crying uncontrollably, repeating the same sentence over and over. "He attacked me. I had no choice." At first glance, it sounded like a tragic case of self-defense. But veteran detective Sarah Mitchell had learned something over 20 years of homicide investigations. People can lie. Evidence rarely does. As the crime scene team began documenting every inch of the house, something immediately caught her attention. The living room was spotless. The dining room was untouched. Nothing appeared broken. There were no overturned chairs, no shattered picture frames, no signs of the violent struggle Emily had described. If Daniel had launched a sudden attack, where was the evidence? The kitchen looked almost frozen in time. A half-finished dinner still sat on the table. 2 wine glasses stood side by side. One plate had barely been touched. The other was nearly empty. It looked less like the aftermath of a desperate fight and more like an ordinary evening interrupted by something unexpected. Then investigators found the knife. It wasn't hidden. It wasn't thrown across the room. It rested only a few feet from Daniel's body. The forensic photographer carefully documented its position before technicians collected it for analysis. Emily told detectives Daniel had grabbed the knife during an argument. She claimed she wrestled it away from him and stabbed him once while trying to protect herself. It was a story that sounded possible, until the medical examiner arrived. After a brief examination, she quietly pulled Detective Mitchell aside. "There may be a problem," she said. "The wound doesn't match her account." The blade had entered Daniel's chest at a downward angle. That was unusual. Emily was nearly 6 inches shorter than her husband. If she had been defending herself while he stood over her, investigators expected the wound to angle upward, not downward. It wasn't proof that she was lying, but it was enough to raise serious questions. Meanwhile, crime scene technicians made another discovery. There were almost no defensive injuries on Daniel's hands or arms. If he had violently attacked Emily first, investigators expected cuts, bruises, or signs that he had fought for control of the knife. Instead, his hands showed almost nothing. Detective Mitchell looked around the silent kitchen one more time. Something didn't fit. Then another officer approached carrying 2 evidence bags. "Detective, you should see this." Inside one bag was Daniel's cell phone. Inside the other, Emily's. Both devices would soon reveal messages that painted a very different picture of their marriage. And if those messages were genuine, the fairy tale wedding everyone had celebrated just 8 days earlier had already begun falling apart long before the murder. As digital forensic experts unlocked the phones, detectives prepared for routine evidence collection. Instead, they uncovered a conversation that suggested someone had been planning a life without Daniel before the wedding was even over. The following morning, detectives sent both phones to the digital forensics laboratory. Emily had insisted there was nothing unusual on either device. According to her, they had argued over finances, Daniel became violent, and everything that happened afterward was a terrible accident. If that was true, the phones would simply confirm the story. But they didn't. Forensic analysts recovered hundreds of deleted text messages, call logs, and internet searches that had never been erased completely. One conversation immediately caught Detective Mitchell's attention. It had been deleted just 2 days before the wedding. The messages were between Emily and an unknown number saved only as A. Hey, are you sure you're going through with it? Emily replied just 3 minutes later. Emily, I have to. Just trust me. Another message followed. Hey, what about afterward? Emily's response was short. Everything will be different soon. Detectives stared at the screen. Different? In what way? At first, it wasn't enough to prove anything. People delete messages all the time. But when analysts dug deeper, they found something even stranger. Just 5 days before the wedding, Emily had searched online. Can life insurance be claimed immediately after marriage? Then, how long before a spouse receives life insurance benefits? Detective Mitchell leaned back in her chair. It could all be innocent, or it could be the beginning of a motive. Investigators requested Daniel's financial records. Within hours, another discovery changed the direction of the case. Daniel had recently updated his life insurance policy. The beneficiary, Emily, if Daniel died, she would receive nearly $750,000. Until that moment, detectives had been investigating a possible case of self-defense. Now, they had to consider another possibility. Was this an argument that turned deadly? Or had someone entered the marriage already planning how it would end? Meanwhile, detectives interviewed Daniel's family. His younger sister, Laura, struggled to hold back tears. There was something wrong, she whispered. When I asked Daniel if everything was okay, he smiled. But it wasn't a real smile. She explained that Daniel had become unusually quiet during the week leading up to the wedding. Twice, he had almost canceled it. When detectives asked why, Laura hesitated. Then she remembered something Daniel had said only 3 days before the ceremony. I love her, but I don't think she loves me the same way anymore. That single statement changed everything. It suggested the marriage had been in trouble before it even began. Then another witness came forward. A neighbor reported hearing a loud argument the night before the killing. Not screams of fear, but 2 people arguing about money. The witness remembered one sentence clearly. A woman shouted, "You promised it would all be mine." Detectives couldn't confirm who had spoken those words. But if the witness was right, Emily's claim that the fight suddenly began on the night of the stabbing no longer matched what others had heard. Every new interview created more questions. Every new piece of evidence chipped away at her version of events. Then forensic analysts called Detective Mitchell with the DNA results from the murder weapon. The fingerprints on the knife were exactly what investigators expected. What they didn't expect was what was missing. There was only one clear set of fingerprints on the knife. And that discovery would force detectives to ask a chilling question. Had Daniel ever held the weapon at all? The fingerprint report arrived just before noon. Detective Sarah Mitchell opened the file expecting to confirm Emily's account. Instead, she found something that made her pause. The knife carried one complete set of fingerprints. Emily's. Daniel's fingerprints were nowhere on the handle. That didn't automatically prove murder. Blood, moisture, or the way someone grabbed the knife can affect fingerprints. But combined with everything else, it became another piece of a growing puzzle. If Daniel had attacked Emily with that knife, why was there no clear evidence that he had ever held it? The medical examiner soon added another crucial detail. Daniel had suffered a single fatal stab wound to the chest. There were no hesitation wounds, no defensive cuts, no bruises suggesting a prolonged fight. The attack had been swift, accurate, and devastating. It happened very quickly, the medical examiner explained. He likely had little or no opportunity to defend himself. That conclusion directly contradicted Emily's statement that they had struggled over the knife for several minutes. Detectives decided it was time to interview Emily again. This time, they asked her to describe the final moments of Daniel's life step by step. She took a deep breath. He came into the kitchen angry, she said. He grabbed the knife from the counter. I backed away. He kept coming. I managed to grab his wrist. The knife turned toward him during the struggle. Detective Mitchell listened without interrupting. Then she placed several crime scene photographs on the table. Can you explain something for me? Emily nodded. If Daniel was moving toward you, why is there no evidence that either of you moved around the kitchen? Emily stared at the photographs. The floor showed almost no disturbance. The chairs were exactly where they belonged. Even a glass sitting near the edge of the counter hadn't fallen. She hesitated. I don't know. Mitchell asked another question. You also told us Daniel pushed you against the refrigerator. Emily agreed. The detective slid another photograph across the table. Investigators had examined the refrigerator from top to bottom. There were no dents, no fresh scratches, no transferred fibers, no blood, nothing to suggest anyone had been forced against it. For the first time since the interview began, Emily stopped answering immediately. She looked down at the table. Her breathing became heavier. Several seconds passed before she finally spoke. It all happened so fast. I don't remember everything. Detective Mitchell recognized the shift. People who experience trauma can forget details, but they usually don't forget the central event. Emily's story wasn't simply missing details. It was changing. As the interview ended, detectives released her while the investigation continued. They still didn't have enough evidence to make an arrest, but the gaps in her story were growing larger by the hour. Then another breakthrough arrived. Financial investigators uncovered activity in Emily's bank records that had nothing to do with self-defense. Just 4 days before the wedding, she had transferred nearly all of her personal savings into a brand new account, an account Daniel didn't know existed. And less than 24 hours after his death, before the funeral had even been planned, Emily contacted the insurance company to ask about the status of Daniel's life insurance policy. She hadn't asked about funeral arrangements. She hadn't asked about collecting his personal belongings. Her first recorded inquiry was about the money. Detectives now had a possible motive. But motives alone don't solve murder cases. What finally convinced investigators they were dealing with a planned killing wasn't found in the house. It was hidden inside a small notebook discovered during a second search of the home. 3 days into the investigation, detectives returned to the house with a second search warrant. The first search had focused on the obvious: the kitchen, the murder weapon, fingerprints, blood evidence, and signs of a struggle. This time, they were looking for something different. Motive. Detective Sarah Mitchell believed that if Daniel's death had been planned, there had to be evidence somewhere inside the house. She instructed every investigator to search methodically, room by room. Bedrooms, closets, drawers, computers. Nothing was too small to examine. For nearly 2 hours, they found nothing significant. Then, Officer James Reynolds opened the bottom drawer of a nightstand in the master bedroom. Hidden beneath several old magazines was a small black notebook. It wasn't locked. It wasn't labeled. At first glance, it looked like an ordinary journal. But as detectives flipped through its pages, they realized they had found something far more important. Most of the notebook contained shopping lists, appointment reminders, and household expenses. Then, halfway through, the handwriting changed. Entire pages were filled with financial calculations, mortgage balances, credit card debts, insurance estimates, retirement accounts, and one page had Daniel's life insurance policy written across the top. Detective Mitchell read the figures silently. The estimated payout matched almost exactly what investigators had already learned from the insurance company. Several numbers had been circled repeatedly. One sentence, written in darker ink than the rest, immediately caught her attention. Everything changes after 8 days. The room fell silent. 8 days. Daniel had died exactly 8 days after the wedding. Was it coincidence? Or was it a timeline? Mitchell refused to jump to conclusions. One sentence in a notebook wasn't enough to prove murder, but it justified digging even deeper. The notebook was sent to handwriting experts. At the same time, financial investigators continued tracing Emily's recent spending. Another surprise emerged. Just 1 week before the wedding, Emily had visited 3 different jewelry stores, not to buy wedding rings. She had been asking about selling valuable jewelry. Store employees remembered her because she repeatedly asked how quickly cash could be paid for expensive items. It seemed strange. Friends had described Daniel as financially comfortable. Why would his fiancée suddenly need cash? Then detectives discovered something even more troubling. Emily had quietly accumulated thousands of dollars in personal debt over the previous 2 years. Credit cards, personal loans, missed payments, collection notices. Daniel apparently knew almost nothing about them. If they were true, Emily had entered the marriage carrying financial problems she had carefully hidden. Detectives now had something they hadn't had before, a possible financial motive. But they still needed proof that Daniel hadn't attacked her. That proof came from somewhere completely unexpected. A technician reviewing neighborhood security cameras noticed a small detail outside the house just minutes before the emergency call. A detail so unusual, it forced investigators to completely rethink the timeline of the murder. The security footage showed someone leaving the house long before Emily claimed the stabbing had happened. Who was it? And why had she never mentioned seeing anyone at all? The neighborhood was quiet. Tree-lined streets. Well-kept homes. It wasn't the kind of place where detectives expected to find surveillance footage that could solve a homicide. Still, they knocked on every door. One homeowner mentioned a recently installed security camera overlooking the street. "It's always recording," he told detectives. "I don't know if it caught anything, but you're welcome to check." Hours later, investigators sat inside the digital forensics lab, watching the footage frame by frame. At first, nothing. Cars passed. A jogger ran by. A dog walker crossed the street. Everything appeared ordinary. Then Detective Sarah Mitchell stopped the video. "Back it up." The technician rewound the footage by 20 seconds. There it was. A dark-colored SUV slowly pulled into the neighborhood approximately 45 minutes before Emily called 911. The vehicle stopped briefly in front of the Carter home. No one got out. After a few moments, it drove away. Detectives noted the time. Strange, but not suspicious enough. Then they continued watching. Nearly 20 minutes later, the front door opened. A man walked out of the house. He wasn't running. He wasn't injured. He looked completely calm. He stood on the front porch for several seconds before walking toward his pickup truck parked in the driveway. Detective Mitchell frowned. "Zoom in." The technician enhanced the footage. Although the image wasn't perfect, the man's clothing matched what Daniel had been wearing when police found him dead. The timestamp showed he had left the house. Then, less than 2 minutes later, he walked back inside. That single detail destroyed one of Emily's key claims. She had told detectives the argument began the moment Daniel arrived home from work and escalated almost immediately. But according to the surveillance footage, Daniel had already been home. He had gone back outside, returned inside, and remained alive well after the time Emily suggested the violence had started. The timeline no longer matched. Mitchell circled the time on her notepad. Something happened after he went back inside. But what? Investigators continued reviewing the footage. 27 minutes later, Emily's front door opened again. This time, no one came out. The door remained open for several seconds. Then it slowly closed by itself. There was still no sign of panic. No neighbors rushing over. No screams. No desperate cries for help. And then, almost 11 full minutes passed. Only after those 11 minutes did Emily make the emergency call. Detectives exchanged uneasy glances. If Daniel had attacked her, why wait? Why spend 11 minutes inside the house before calling for help? The question became even more important after emergency dispatch released the audio recording. Emily sounded upset. She was crying, but experienced dispatchers noticed something unusual. Between sobs, her breathing remained remarkably steady. She answered detailed questions clearly. She described events in perfect chronological order. Veteran investigators knew everyone reacts to trauma differently, but they also knew that people telling rehearsed stories often sounded unusually organized. Detective Mitchell wasn't ready to accuse Emily of anything. Not yet, but every new piece of evidence pointed in the same direction. Her version of events wasn't simply incomplete. It was becoming impossible. Then forensic analysts made one final discovery. A tiny bloodstain, barely visible to the naked eye, hidden beneath the kitchen sink. When they tested it, the results raised a disturbing possibility. Someone had tried to clean the crime scene before calling police. If the blood had been cleaned intentionally, the killing wasn't a split-second act of self-defense. It may have been a murder followed by a carefully planned cover-up. The laboratory report arrived the next morning. The tiny bloodstain found beneath the kitchen sink belonged to Daniel. But that wasn't the discovery that changed the case. Chemical testing revealed traces of household bleach on the cabinet door, the floor, and a nearby dish towel. Someone had tried to clean the area, not thoroughly enough to remove every trace of blood, but enough to suggest the scene had been altered before police arrived. Detective Sarah Mitchell looked at the report for several seconds. Then she quietly said, "Bring Emily back in." This time, the interview room felt different. Emily no longer looked confident. Dark circles surrounded her eyes. She had barely slept since Daniel's death. Mitchell placed a thick file on the table. She didn't open it. She simply let it sit there. Sometimes, silence makes people more uncomfortable than questions. After nearly 30 seconds, Mitchell finally spoke. "Emily, we've reviewed the crime scene. We've reviewed the security footage. We've reviewed your phone. And we've reviewed the forensic evidence." Emily swallowed hard. Mitchell continued calmly. "You've told us the same story 3 different times. But each time, it changes." Emily looked away. "I've been traumatized. I don't remember everything." Mitchell nodded. "I understand. But trauma doesn't explain why someone tried to clean Daniel's blood before calling 911. Emily's face froze. I didn't clean anything." The detective slid several photographs across the table. Close-up images of the cabinet beneath the sink. Chemical test results. Blood pattern diagrams. Emily stared at them without speaking. Then Mitchell placed one final document in front of her. The emergency call timeline. "Help me understand something. You told the dispatcher the stabbing had just happened, but our investigation shows you waited nearly 11 minutes before making that call. What happened during those 11 minutes? Emily's breathing became faster. She rubbed her hands together. "I was scared. I panicked." Mitchell leaned forward. "I believe you were scared, but I don't believe that's all you were doing." The room fell silent. Then Emily quietly whispered, "He wasn't supposed to die?" The detective didn't react. Instead, she let Emily continue. Tears rolled down Emily's face. "It was just supposed to make him listen." Mitchell's eyes narrowed slightly. "What do you mean?" Emily covered her face with both hands. I didn't think it would happen like that." For several seconds, no one spoke. Detectives knew better than to interrupt. People often reveal the most important details when they're trying to explain themselves. Emily slowly lowered her hands. "We argued about money. He said he wanted to change everything." Mitchell immediately caught the wording. "Change what?" Emily hesitated. "The insurance. My name. He said he wasn't sure we should stay married." The detective finally understood. If Daniel had really planned to remove Emily as the beneficiary of his insurance policy, the financial motive detectives suspected suddenly became much stronger. But there was still one problem. Emily had admitted they argued. She had admitted panic. She had admitted things hadn't happened exactly as she first claimed. Yet she still insisted. She never intended to kill him. Detectives ended the interview without making an arrest. They wanted one more piece of evidence. Something that would leave no room for doubt. That evidence arrived later that afternoon. From the medical examiner. It wasn't about fingerprints. It wasn't about DNA. It was about the angle, force, and distance of the fatal wound. And according to science, Emily's version of the stabbing was physically impossible. The autopsy reconstruction revealed that Daniel wasn't charging toward Emily when he was stabbed. He was standing almost completely still. And that discovery gave prosecutors exactly what they needed to charge Emily with murder. 2 weeks later, the county courthouse was packed. Friends, family, reporters, even strangers who had followed the case from the beginning filled the gallery. Everyone wanted the answer to the same question. How had a marriage that lasted only 8 days ended in a murder trial? Emily Carter entered the courtroom wearing a dark gray suit. She avoided looking toward Daniel's family. His parents sat in the front row, holding hands. His mother clutched a photograph from the wedding. It had been taken just 6 days before Daniel died. In it, they looked happy, young, hopeful. The prosecutor held up the same photograph before the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "this is not the story of a marriage that slowly fell apart. This is the story of a marriage that never truly began." He walked slowly across the courtroom. "The defendant wants you to believe this was self-defense. But self-defense leaves evidence. A violent struggle leaves evidence. A terrified victim acting in panic leaves evidence." He paused. This crime scene left something else. A carefully constructed story. Over the next several days, prosecutors called one witness after another. The crime scene investigator explained why there were no signs of a violent struggle. The forensic scientist described the traces of bleach found beneath the kitchen sink. The digital analyst presented the deleted text messages recovered from Emily's phone. The jury listened carefully as each piece of evidence fit together like pieces of a puzzle. Then came the medical examiner. The courtroom fell silent. Using diagrams and 3D models, she explained the fatal wound. The knife entered at a downward angle, she testified. Based on the physical evidence, the victim was not charging toward the defendant. She pointed to the reconstruction displayed on a screen. In my professional opinion, the victim was either standing still or stepping backward. A murmur spread through the courtroom. That single statement challenged the heart of Emily's defense. If Daniel hadn't been attacking her, then why had she claimed he was? Emily's defense attorney stood and approached the witness. Doctor, is it possible the wound occurred during a struggle? The medical examiner answered carefully. Anything is theoretically possible, but based on the evidence, it is highly unlikely. The prosecutor smiled slightly. He had been waiting for that answer. Next, detectives played the recording of Emily's 911 call. Jurors listened as her voice filled the courtroom. She cried. She sounded frightened. But then the prosecutor displayed the timeline beside the recording. Security footage, phone records, forensic evidence. Every minute was accounted for. The 11-minute delay before calling emergency services became impossible to ignore. Then Detective Sarah Mitchell took the stand. She looked directly at the jury. In every homicide investigation, we ask one question. Does the physical evidence support the story? She paused. In this case, it did not. She explained the missing signs of struggle, the clean blood beneath the sink, the changing statements, the deleted messages, the financial motive. One by one, the pieces formed a complete picture. By the end of the prosecution's case, the courtroom had become almost completely silent. But the defense still had one final opportunity. Emily herself chose to testify, and what she said next would leave the jury questioning everything they had heard before. Under oath, Emily finally admitted something she had never told detectives. It wasn't a confession, but it was enough to change the direction of the trial forever. The courtroom was silent as Emily Carter took the witness stand. For the first time since Daniel's death, the jury would hear directly from the woman accused of killing her husband. She looked exhausted. Her hands trembled as she adjusted the microphone. Her attorney asked the first question. Emily, did you love your husband? She looked down before answering. Yes. The prosecutor watched quietly. Then came the question everyone had been waiting for. Did you intentionally kill Daniel Carter? Emily immediately shook her head. No, I never wanted him to die. She admitted they had argued constantly during the week after the wedding. According to Emily, Daniel had discovered several financial problems she had hidden before they married. He was angry, disappointed. She claimed he wanted to cancel their future together. He said he couldn't trust me anymore, she whispered. I thought my whole life was falling apart. But then she said something that surprised everyone in the courtroom. I lied. A wave of whispers spread through the gallery. The judge immediately called for order. Emily wiped tears from her face. I wasn't honest when I first spoke to the police. I panicked. I was afraid no one would believe me. The prosecutor slowly stood. He had been waiting for this moment. Mrs. Carter, you've admitted lying to investigators. How can this jury believe anything you're saying today? Emily hesitated. I was scared. You were scared, the prosecutor repeated. So you invented a story about self-defense? No. She stopped speaking. The prosecutor stepped closer. You told police Daniel attacked you. That wasn't true, was it? Emily remained silent. You said there was a violent struggle. The evidence says otherwise. Still no answer. You claimed you called for help immediately. But you waited. Again. Silence. The prosecutor placed the wedding photograph in front of the jury. This picture was taken 6 days before Daniel died. He turned toward Emily. You married him knowing your relationship was already collapsing, didn't you? Emily's eyes filled with tears. I thought we could fix it. But when he told you he planned to remove you from his life insurance policy, the prosecutor paused. Everything changed. Emily looked away. The courtroom was completely still. The prosecutor delivered his final question. Isn't the truth that Daniel's death wasn't the result of self-defense, but the result of a decision you made when you realized your future was slipping away? Emily never answered. Instead, she quietly lowered her head. The prosecution rested. The defense argued there was still reasonable doubt. No eyewitness had seen the stabbing. No video captured the exact moment Daniel died. They reminded jurors that suspicion alone was not enough to convict. The prosecution agreed. "You're right," the prosecutor said during closing arguments. "Suspicion is not enough. But evidence is." He reviewed the timeline one last time. The changing stories, the deleted messages, the financial motive, the forensic reconstruction, the clean blood, the 11-minute delay before calling 911. No single piece proves guilt by itself, he said. But together, they tell one story. The jury deliberated for nearly 9 hours. Daniel's parents waited quietly in the hallway. Emily sat with her attorney, saying almost nothing. Finally, the courtroom deputy announced that the jury had reached a verdict. Everyone stood as the jurors returned. The foreperson unfolded a single sheet of paper. On the charge of second-degree murder, we, the jury, find the defendant. The courtroom held its breath. One word was about to determine Emily Carter's future forever. The courtroom was so quiet that the sound of the foreperson unfolding the verdict form echoed through the room. Emily Carter stared at the table in front of her. Daniel's parents held each other's hands. No one moved. No one spoke. The judge nodded toward the foreperson. "You may read the verdict." The foreperson took a deep breath. On the charge of second-degree murder, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty. A quiet gasp spread through the courtroom. Daniel's mother broke into tears, lowering her head into her husband's shoulder. For nearly 2 years, they had waited to hear those words. To them, it wasn't a victory. It was simply the end of a painful search for the truth. Emily remained motionless. She closed her eyes for a brief moment as the verdict settled over the courtroom. The judge thanked the jurors for their service before scheduling a sentencing hearing several weeks later. The sentencing. When sentencing day arrived, the courtroom was filled once again. This time, there were no dramatic witnesses, no forensic experts, no crime scene photographs, only the families. Daniel's younger sister stood before the court with tears in her eyes. "My brother believed marriage meant forever," she said. "He trusted the woman standing just a few feet from him. He never imagined that 8 days after saying 'I do,' his life would be over." She paused, struggling to continue. "Our family didn't just lose Daniel. We lost birthdays. We lost holidays. We lost every future memory we were supposed to make together. There is no sentence that can give us those moments back." The courtroom fell silent. Then Emily was given an opportunity to speak. She slowly approached the podium. For several seconds, she said nothing. Finally, she looked toward Daniel's family. "I'm sorry. I know those words aren't enough. I wish I could change what happened, but I can't." Whether those words reflected genuine remorse or regret for the consequences would remain a question only Emily herself could answer. After hearing from both families, the judge delivered the sentence. He described the case as a profound betrayal of trust. The victim entered this marriage expecting to build a future, the judge said. Instead, within days, his life was taken. The judge sentenced Emily Carter to 25 years to life in prison. As deputies escorted her from the courtroom, she turned once toward the gallery. No one spoke. Moments later, the courtroom doors closed behind her. Epilogue. Cases like this remind investigators that appearances can be dangerously misleading. Wedding photographs capture only a single day. They cannot reveal private arguments, hidden financial problems, or the decisions people make behind closed doors. For Detective Sarah Mitchell, one lesson from the investigation stood above all others. It wasn't one piece of evidence that solved this case, she later explained. It was dozens of small details. A fingerprint that wasn't there. A timeline that didn't fit. A story that kept changing. Each clue, by itself, seemed ordinary. But together, they revealed the truth. Daniel Carter's life ended just 8 days after his wedding. A future filled with hope disappeared in a single evening. His family would never get him back. But after a careful investigation, months of forensic work, and a trial that examined every detail, the truth finally emerged. Justice could never erase the loss, but it ensured that the lies surrounding Daniel's death would not become his legacy. What do you think? Did the forensic evidence prove Emily's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt? Or do you believe there were still unanswered questions? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy in-depth true crime documentaries that explore the evidence, the investigation, and the courtroom process, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Mind Blowing for more gripping cases every week. Until next time, stay curious. And remember, sometimes the smallest clue tells the biggest story.